Hello, friends and adventurers. I'm M, and welcome to dMTable. Now, as you probably well know already, I'm a dungeon master, and as a dungeon master, I have, and every dungeon master has, their own dungeon crawling tricks to help them along to get that mega dungeon or regular dungeon better suited to player enjoyment. And not to mention preparation. And this is important. The less preparation you do for greater effect, the more effect you have, the more dungeon you have, the more fun you have. So, here is a trick on how to not limit yourself on the nature and the shape of your dungeon and how to prepare it better and quicker. And from less limited sources. More creatively. It's important to have all the creativity you want. Which is to say, you can have all kinds of dungeons. Usually what people do is they seek out those pre-made dungeons that have the grid already on. You know, the squares to move over and so on to better facilitate the combat. But that usually limits you. Even if you have a good program for this, or even if you make it by hand, making the whole dungeon on a grid limits how the dungeon feels. What it does. The whole idea gets limited. You don't get to make strange twisty pipes and crawlways. You don't get to make strange mushrooms that are hollowed out from inside to be dungeons. You don't get to make all kinds of weird vertical transitions. You don't get to make all of that. And mind you, whilst sometimes people experiment with it and make one or two of these, when you're free of this, you will have all kinds of weird three-dimensional dungeons. For example, something that's like a hive with a huge open air for flying room in the middle. So, that sort of thing and many more. And how I do this, and even though I've never DM'd online and only in person, I can tell you this works for online things. I have seen it done. You can have your dungeon ready, you can draw it, you can imagine it, you can make it however you want, or even draw it in real time, by hand, as you go along. That's what I do live, but on the internet that's probably not an option, which is unfortunate and one of my many regrets about online DMing. But anyways, what you can do is have the dungeon drawn as much as you want, as many angles as you want, as many different scenes and rooms and so on and so forth, to getting pictures from the internet, doing whatever you want, and then when the combat strikes, you can overlay the grid on the part where it's happening. You can even have some small generic template ready in case it's somewhere really weird. And then you can overlay that grid best as you can over the part you drew. And sure, there'll be some inconsistencies, some squares will be too small, some cut off, and so on and so forth, but you can rule on the fly all this. Some things will give more cover, some will be normal, some won't be able to be stepped in, even though they look almost like they could, but it'll all abide to human logic, and you'll be able to arbitrate this easily with your players, and you'll be able to have combat anywhere in as a weird dungeon as you want. And believe me, the trade-offs are more than worth it, because you can have all kinds of unique dungeons. You'll never need to think whether the dungeon is grid compliant anymore. You will just have wonderful dungeons, and sometimes they'll be very weird, sometimes they won't, but you'll always have freedom to draw what you want, to make what you want, to have as excessively lush, wondrous dungeon as you want, without thinking about the grid and without needing to pre-draw the whole freaking thing and waste time. No, just draw a small part of the grid or overlay it in your program right on top, transparently, and use it as best as you can. You can even orient it in space however you best want. So that's what I recommend, and that's what I occasionally do. So, adventurers, if you thought this was unique, maybe you can spare me a click and I could see you here next, and perhaps even every week, because every week I have new unique stuff like this for you. I make it all myself. Until then, see you next time.